Welcome back to another exciting episode on the show, Hidden Secrets in Books. You guys know I only bring the best of guests to my show. And once again, today we have a very special guest. Today's guest is Shanti Hershenson, an award-winning young author whose writing journey began almost as soon as she could hold a pencil. By the time she was in sixth grade, she had already published her first two novellas. Since then, she has gone on to write across multiple genres, including science fiction, fantasy, contemporary fiction, and novels in verse. Alongside her writing, Shanti is a passionate anti-bullying advocate who uses both storytelling and poetry to encourage empathy, resilience, and hope. Now a senior in high school preparing to study creative writing in college, Shanti continues to inspire young writers by proving that age is never a barrier for pursuing your dreams. Shanti, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so thank you so much, Shanti. So, you are still in high school, right?
I just graduated.
Oh, wonderful. Because when I saw you, you look quite a bit young, but I didn't know you were still in high school. I figured out that you were already in college as well. So, thank you. So, your name is Hershenson. I'm wondering, where are you from?
Oh, I'm from Southern California.
Oh, okay. Because I think this is the first time I've seen this name, Hershenson. All right. So, you have been writing since you were very young, since you started holding a pencil. How old were you then?
Oh my gosh. So yeah, when I first started, when I first became very obsessed with writing, I was around 5 or 6 years old.
Wow. So is that when you realized that you wanted to become an author?
Absolutely.
Wow. So your first books, they were published while you were still in sixth grade. Tell us what that experience was like.
Oh my gosh. It was the experience of publishing those first two books. It was a very silly experience. It was very lighthearted. And in many ways, it was an experiment. And it was also sort of an accident. So what happened was a friend and I, we had written these two novellas. And I, in particular, really wanted a printed copy of these books. So I went online and I researched all of the different ways in which I could print a book. And it was then that I discovered Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. So me being 12 and curious and tech savvy, I went online and I filled out all of the different forms. And all of a sudden, I had a printed copy of the book. I had also just self-published the book. So as very unserious as that experience was, that's what gave me that skill set and the knowledge to then go and later on, as I was writing my first novel, understand sort of how the publishing or the self-publishing process worked, and it helped me understand all the different options available to me.
Okay, thank you so much, Shanti. So many young people dream of writing a book. As a young writer, what advice would you give them about getting started?
Good question. So as silly as it might sound, the biggest thing you can do is just start writing. And it's not the best advice, but it's certainly, I think the most important thing is just sit down. If you're passionate about an idea, if you're thinking of writing something, and just see what comes to mind. Other than that, it can be very helpful to read a lot. I know people say to read within the genre you want to write, and that's certainly very helpful. But also just reading anything in general, even maybe before you're starting writing, go and just read a little bit, and then maybe you'll have more ideas to translate onto the page. Otherwise, just simply researching, thinking of if you're aspiring to become a published author, research what that life is like. Research all the different opportunities available to you. Research the experiences of going to book signings, of doing interviews, maybe listen to other authors talk. Because even though maybe that's something that you're not at the point of yet, those are all very real possibilities. And sort of seeing what your life could look like is amazing motivation.
Okay. So how does someone go from finishing a manuscript to actually publishing a book?
So,
I mean, at your age.
of course, so it's a very it's more of a complicated process than some people would maybe think. So when you're done with that first draft, and for me, I write 1,000 words every single day, so I'm done with the first draft anywhere from 1 to 6 months, and after that, I personally usually let it sit and go work on something else, but that's not necessarily something you have to do. But then after that, I find the editing process to be extremely important. I work with an editor, and I think that is something that's necessary because for me, it's really important, especially when I'm writing all of these kind of complicated books with these very complicated plot lines. First off, that someone else can read it and understand what I'm trying to say and understand how something works, and also make sure everything feels cohesive, that the pacing is great. But then, of course, I'll do several rounds of editing myself, and then I'll turn it over to my editor. And then after that, I have to read through it a handful more. And then after that, I usually start promoting and marketing the book. I start planning out, okay, when am I going to release this? What do I need to do to ensure that people know about this book and are going to read it? And then sometimes that actually overlaps the editing process a little bit. But and then I'll send it out to early readers who will read and review the book. And then after that, I will publish it.
Okay, so you have written an incredible number of books at such a young age. How have you stayed so disciplined and productive?
Question. So I would argue the biggest thing for me has been that I write every single day, no matter what. I have written when I've had a concussion. I have written in the hospital. I have written when I'm really sick. I've written when I have a million other things to do. I write on holidays. I wrote on graduation. And all of that is very essential to my process, because for me, I basically now have built this sort of structure where if I'm writing every single day, then it's just a given that I'm going to write that day. So then very easily and efficiently, I can finish projects where if you write 1,000 words a day, it only takes around 1 to 6 months to complete that first draft. And then after that, I'm always writing and editing a book at the same time. So that's incredibly helpful. I'm not just like, I never feel like I'm stuck in the editing process with one book. Even if I am, I always have something fresh and new that I'm writing every day. So with that always helps me produce new work.
Okay, so how are you able to balance school, friendships, and everyday teenage life while continuing to write?
Question. It can be very challenging. That said, I have gotten a whole lot better at it. So usually what I do is I come up with to-do lists with every single thing I need to do during the day. And I will almost put hanging out with other people as part of my to-do list. But usually what I try to do is I try to get everything done before I go and hang out with people or relax or do fun things. That said, I'm flexible. Sometimes I go and do fun stuff during the day, and then in the evening I write and do all of my work. I also have gotten significantly better at balancing this with schoolwork, because as much as writing is the most important thing for me, school is also very important. So I have gotten better at prioritizing different assignments. Particularly with school, I try to do some of my schoolwork first. Maybe not all of it, but a good amount of it, because I know I'm going to write, but I don't know if I'm going to finish my schoolwork.
So you're saying your writing is more of a priority than your schoolwork.
Yeah.
Why is that the case?
So for me, I find that writing is just the most important thing, is what I want to do with my life. I want to write books. I want to be an author full time. So everything I'm doing in school is sort of to help and support that dream. So, and there is no bigger way that I can support that dream by simply just writing.
Okay, so in your opinion, what can schools do differently to create safer and more supportive environments for students?
Good question. I think that in general, schools need to take into account that every student is unique, and what might work for one student might not necessarily work for another student, and particularly with students who are creative. They might be perceived as being like distracted or lazy or not paying attention. But in reality, these are students that have the capability to really engage with the material if it's being presented in a way that's more interesting, and if they're able to sort of use their creativity and to sort of approach the work in a way that means something to them.
All right, Shanti. So moving on, you have experimented with different genres, including novels in verse. What attracted you to telling stories through poetry?
Ooh, so with poetry, I find I can approach stories that might be a bit more challenging to do in standard prose. That doesn't mean they're impossible to do in prose. But I think poetry is this really efficient way to be able to break certain conventions and really play around with the narrative in just ways that are significantly harder to do in prose and might not come across in the same way. So I have written two novels told in poetry, and I wrote them in poetry in verse for different reasons. So the first book was You Won't Know Her Name. It's a novel told in poetry about bullying that is largely based on a true story. And with that, I had tried to tackle the book in several different forms. I had tried to write it as a standard novel, and I found I couldn't quite get it on the page in that way. One thing I realized very early on is that I didn't want any of these characters to have any names. Who the people were in the story was not important. It's what happened and how it was handled and the response that was received. So with that, I felt that it felt to me it felt like significantly more challenging. And mind you, I was 13 to write a novel in standard prose where these characters had no names. And also, I'm telling a story that takes place over a sort of kind of complicated span of time. It's going to feel a little bit blurry. It needs to be like snapshots of moments. And I felt at the time that the easiest way I could do this was through poetry. And that said, poetry was also a very important part of the healing process for me. And it was always going to be a very important part of that narrative. So, with that, if I have a book about a girl who ultimately overcomes so many of her challenges by writing poetry, then I think it's even more powerful if the book itself is written in poetry. And in that way, it sort of feels like that book could have been written by her. On the other hand, my second novel told in poetry is called Pontus and Electra to the Depths of the Sea. And that is a novel told in verse about sharks. And obviously, I can't get inside the head of a shark in the same way I can with a human. It's a lot harder to figure out what these characters are feeling. And that said, it's totally not impossible for me to have written this in prose. That said, I felt like I was writing a story that was never going to be that long. And more so, it was always going to be something that was a little bit more like magical and experimental and sort of out there. And with poetry, I can sort of convey maybe certain thoughts, and I can convey certain feelings that sort of rhythmically are a little bit harder to achieve in prose, if that makes sense.
So here is my final question for you. Looking ahead, what are your biggest goals as both a writer and an advocate?
So for me, I want to keep addressing complex and maybe sort of underrepresented themes in my books. At the same time, I want to keep working with these very intricate themes in a way that is exciting and engaging both for young people and for adults. I also want to explore all of the different ways in which my work can come to life. The novels and, creative, novels and poetry are my favorite things, but also it would be cool to see all the different other sort of narrative formats I can explore.
Right, thank you so much, Shanti. Thank you for sharing your journey and reminding us that passion, creativity, and perseverance aren't limited by age. The commitment to storytelling, encouraging young writers, and standing up against bullying is making a real difference. We can't wait to see where your writing journey takes you next. So, for those that would like to connect with you and learn more about your work, how
So,
can they do that?
you can find me, first off, my books anywhere you can buy books online. They're available in some bookstores and libraries. If you look me up, you should certainly find options. On the other hand, you can find me on my website, which is shantihershenson.com. That's ShantiHershenson.com. You can find me on my Instagram, which is at Shanti Hershenson, and my TikTok, which is at Shanti Who Writes. So if you look me up, I'll be there.
Thank you so much, Shanti. This has been a wonderful episode. Thank you for sharing your story with us and for making this episode a very, very wonderful and special one for me. Yes.
Of course.
I also want to thank all my audience for tuning in. You guys are the reason why we are able to do this. Thank you so much. And make sure, as a young author, a young writer, if this episode is sitting with you, try to share it with people as well so they can learn something about writing at a very young age. Thank you so much, Shanti, for coming to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And do have a wonderful day ahead.
You too.
All right.